Hey everyone, we're back with a little quick tip today. I wanted to talk a bit about the animations or like physics simulations that I've been doing in Blender for these wooden piles that I'm currently generating. So I thought I might as well make a little video about it, right? So the setup is pretty simple, honestly. I have a couple of these wooden pieces, 5 of them, doesn't matter how much you have of them. They're all sampling from the same texture, but at this stage, the texture is not that important. Um, the way that the simulation works, or like the physics simulation works, is that I have a capture device here, which is roughly the shape of like this, right? I want to leave like a little bit of wiggle room on like both ends here, so that every piece doesn't exactly need to match the way that it falls into this. So we can kind of see that if we have a look at the top, right? So that the pieces are basically, like, the collision here is a bit wider than the actual pieces that are going to fall into it. So what do we need to do this? We need to do like a little bit of setup before we can just start simulating, right? So under the simulations tab, there's we're going to be focusing on rigid body simulations, as you can see here, um, which is basically just really easy for any hard surface or like solid object kind of simulations. So first of all, let's set up the capturing device. As you can see here, I added a passive rigid body. Passive means that it's not going to be animated itself, but it's going to be capturing other um, active elements that are going to be interacting with this passive element. So that means that the bottom is going to be passive and all these top chunks are going to be active elements. The only thing that I really changed here was making sure that it's a mesh so that it actually has this hole in it. And then I upped the friction as well so that it doesn't look like a bouncy castle with like wood chunks flying everywhere. But feel free to play around with this one in particular. Well, not necessarily like a bouncing castle, but like the surface is going to be simulating like a rougher response, like in terms of the friction. And then also making sure that we tweak the margin, basically the collision margin here, which is going to be very important to how big this hole is. Because let's say if we set this to 1 meter, the margin here is going to be too small for stuff actually going inside of the little um, capture device that we made. That being said, let's move on to all these wooden pieces. So you can see that we have an active element. I've already done some adjustments here. Nothing too big or like too crazy to worry about. The main stuff that I changed was I changed the shape again to mesh. Calculations are going to be a bit more expensive, but they're also going to be more accurate. I changed the mass to 31 kilograms. This is by no means like an accurate estimation of like how heavy these actually would be. I'm just doing this to add more weight so that the movement of all these pieces is going to be a little bit slower and I get more frames in between like the simulation. But you'll see what that means just in a sec. Then again, upping the friction and then turning up the dynamics. So this is basically gonna slow either the translation or the rotation down. Because I don't want pieces to like wildly rotate or like wildly change their velocity over time, I'm putting these to like pretty high up. And then let's try our first simulation. Oh, but before we do, let's make sure that we can actually see what's happening. So I'm gonna set the visibility of this capture device to a wire instead of solid. Let me just also hide these ones. All right, and then whoop, you can see all the pieces are falling into place. Pretty sweet. Stuff is falling through the bottom. I don't care about that. I don't need those pieces anyway, right? I just let it do like one full rotation, like one full animation, which ends at like 200 frames. I think that's the standard for like the timeline, which you can bring up here under the animation tab, or like shift 12 apparently. Yeah. So we have all this now, right? But what does that mean? Well, this means that we can actually go through the entire timeline and select a frame that looks really interesting to us. Um, so let's say, I don't know, I want a little bit deformation on the top. So yeah, stuff like this looks cool where you have like a little bit of deformation on the top. The silhouette looks pretty interesting. Cool. So at this point, what we can do is, let's make sure that this is non-selectable. We can select all the wooden pieces that we want. We can go to Object. Under the Rigid Body tab, there is Apply Transformations. This will apply the transformations that are happening with the physics simulation, and basically will make this the new asset transformation. So all these wooden pieces, they're no longer going to be in that massive tower that we had in the beginning, but this is going to be their new default location. So let's do that. But we can't move this yet though, because it still has animation data attached to it. So we need to make sure that we also get rid of the rigid body. Oh, nice. And then at this point, what we can do is just move it around, and we have like all these wooden chunks that are like nicely simulated. And also, let's get rid of these bottom ones. We don't need those anymore. So that's looking pretty sweet, right? So then we can just stack it in between these pillars right here. Maybe we get rid of this one because it's too close. Maybe we scale this one a little bit. Rotate it, like sort of like pushing it into place, you know? Sweet. And honestly, that's it. There you have it. So this is a pretty simple setup to just generate some wood piles. The important thing here is that once you have it set up like this, make sure that you have a backup to go to. What I mean by that is, remember the tower of wood that we had here? Once we apply the transformations and we remove the rigid body modifier from it, that means that we no longer have access to that tower of wood that we made in the beginning. So at this point, I would have to recreate that. Which is pretty easy to do, right? Like I could just create like a tower of these pieces and then just apply like a random transformation using this little button here. It's pretty simple. But if you want to be smart and you don't want to be like me and having to do that all over again, what I advise you to do is, let's say you have like a tower like this, just duplicate it, put it off to the side, and make sure that you set the let's apply like a rigid body again. Rigid body. Oh, hold on. There we go. And if it's set to active, just set them all to passive. That way that if you start simulation, like they're no longer going to be moving and you don't have to be worried about it, right? But then you can just, let's say, duplicate this tower, set them to active. Nice. So as you can see, like applying the transformation again has reset the default location. And then if we add another rigid body active parameter, we get to do like the same simulations again. This example here is a bit of a different setup, but that's how I generated this wooden pile, for example. So it's quite nice to just have like a random scattering of assets. We can use the same sort of setup. Maybe again, like playing around with these parameters. We can up the friction, up the translation, dampening, all that good stuff, and then just have them sort of collapse onto the floor. Nice. And then again, we can just pick like a frame that we kind of like, and then do the same thing where we apply the transformations, like again under the rigid body, apply the transformations and remove the rigid body modifier, and then we have another static mesh. So pretty simple. I hope that helped. For the final bit, what I did with this is I just added like these wooden sections next to it so that we have something supporting it, right? Like you can see right here, so that it looks like they're being held by like these little wooden sections like on the side, which looks quite cool if you have like multiple next to them. And then we can start using them in conjunction, right? So I have the little scattered one, and then I have two of these ones, like one smaller, one bigger. And then I also have these two that I can kind of stack up onto each other if I wanted to. It still looks decent. Yeah, I hope that helped. And it would be cool to see your results with this. Have fun.